At 1:43 a.m. on August 11th, 2017, Danish police received an emergency call. The voice of the man on the other end was filled with anxiety as he reported that his girlfriend had gone out for work but had since completely disappeared, unreachable, and hadn't returned home. Sensing the worry in his voice, police asked to file the report. "Where did you last see your girlfriend?" The answer surprised even the police. "On a submarine." A submarine? Kim Wall, the missing 30-year-old woman, was a talented Swedish freelance journalist. Throughout her journalism career, she fearlessly reported from around the world, from Sri Lanka, Uganda, Cuba, to the mysterious North Korea. With her talent and courage, Kim's articles were published by prestigious newspapers like The Guardian and The New York Times. In 2017, she was living happily in Denmark with her boyfriend. August 10th, 2017. The fateful day Kim disappeared, she and her boyfriend were excitedly preparing for a house party with friends. While busy arranging food and drinks, Kim's phone suddenly rang. When she read the message, her eyes lit up and she exclaimed, "Excellent!" The message came from Peter Madsen, a bold entrepreneur and famous millionaire inventor from Denmark. Peter Madsen at that time was one of Denmark's most successful icons. People often called him the Elon Musk of Denmark, and this wasn't without reason. While Elon Musk conquers outer space, Peter Madsen devoted his passion to the world of the ocean depths. In 2002, he achieved a miracle by successfully building Denmark's first personal submarine. This success was followed by another breakthrough in 2005, with the country's first hybrid submarine using both diesel and electricity. Not stopping there, he continued with his third ambitious project, the Nautilus UC-3 submarine, recognized as the largest personal submarine ever built at that time. As an experienced journalist, Kim had long harbored the desire to interview Peter. She had persistently contacted him for months, but only received silence. When she had almost given up hope, she unexpectedly received a response. "I agree to the interview." What surprised Kim even more was that Peter not only accepted the interview, but also invited her aboard his submarine Nautilus, his third masterpiece, that very evening. Kim's joy was indescribable. This was the career opportunity any journalist would dream of having. Without a second's hesitation, she immediately canceled the party plans and quickly prepared for this important meeting. At exactly 8 p.m., Kim and her boyfriend arrived at the dock where the Nautilus was moored. Before boarding, she gently told her lover, "The interview might last about 2 hours, maybe a bit longer. Don't worry, I'll do excellently and return right away." Kim's eyes were both radiant with excitement and full of confidence in her professional abilities. After saying goodbye, she stepped alone into the mysterious submarine. Kim's boyfriend returned home feeling reassured, but despite waiting all night until early morning, he received no news from his girlfriend. The Nautilus submarine with Kim aboard was last recorded around midnight. When there was no news from Kim, several possibilities were considered. Perhaps the submarine was operating on the surface, or worse, had encountered an accident and sunk to the bottom. Recognizing the severity of the situation, although the missing person report had only been received early in the morning, police immediately assessed this as an emergency case and launched a comprehensive search operation. After several tense hours, when dawn broke at 10:30 a.m., the submarine appeared within sight of the rescue forces. They discovered it near a lighthouse in Koga Bay, Denmark. Surprisingly, contrary to initial concerns, the submarine appeared to still be intact, with no obvious signs of damage. However, to ensure safety, police still decided to proceed with rescue operations and quickly lowered boats into the water. But just as they were slowly approaching the submarine, something strange happened. The Nautilus, which had been lying quietly, suddenly emitted strange mechanical sounds. Then, as if controlled by an invisible hand, it unexpectedly reactivated and began to gradually sink into the water. This scene left the entire rescue team stunned and confused. What's happening? Right at that critical moment, the hatch on top of the submarine suddenly opened and a figure appeared. It was Peter Madsen, the owner of the Nautilus. He appeared panicked, hastily escaping from the sinking submarine, continuously waving for help and swimming toward the police rescue boat. Meanwhile, the submarine continued to sink deeper and completely disappeared beneath the water's surface. Faced with this unusual scene, the rescue forces were completely bewildered and didn't understand what was happening. They hurriedly asked questions to understand the situation. Peter, with a tense expression, explained, "The submarine had a serious technical malfunction. It's now completely broken down." The next urgent question was, "Where's Kim?" At this point, Peter Madsen made a shocking statement. There was no one else in the submarine besides him. But this sounded contradictory. Clearly, the night before, both Kim and Peter had boarded the Nautilus together. According to Peter's account, the story unfolded as follows. The previous evening, he had kept his appointment to accept the interview and went aboard the Nautilus submarine with Kim. However, after only a short time of operation, he discovered that the submarine's machinery was experiencing serious malfunctions. Concerned for safety, he decided to drop Kim off on a nearby island to ensure she was safe. Afterward, he alone navigated the problematic submarine, drifting at sea all night and barely escaped in the morning. However, this was only Peter's one-sided story. With investigative experience, police couldn't completely trust this narrative. They recognized that there could be many different scenarios that had occurred. Therefore, to ensure the investigation's safety, they decided to detain Peter temporarily. However, at this point, he hadn't been charged with any specific crime as everything was still in the clarification stage. The next important piece was the Nautilus submarine itself. They needed to verify whether Kim was actually still inside and whether the submarine was truly broken, as Peter had claimed. The major challenge was that the submarine had sunk to a depth of 23 feet underwater. To thoroughly investigate inside, they would need to salvage the entire vessel to the surface, a complex and expensive operation. Therefore, as a first step, professional divers were sent down to examine the submarine's exterior. The initial discovery shocked everyone. They confirmed that the submarine had obvious holes. This was completely inconsistent with a normal technical malfunction, but showed that the submarine had been deliberately manipulated to sink. A suspicious atmosphere began to envelop the entire case. Police immediately moved to the official interrogation phase of Peter Madsen. Just 2 days later, on August 12th, an unexpected turning point occurred when Peter suddenly completely changed his testimony. This time, he admitted that there had indeed been a tragic accident inside the submarine, and Kim had unfortunately died. According to this new version, the submarine was diving to a depth of about 56 feet underwater, with Kim inside. Suddenly, the massive metal hatch fell down, struck Kim on the head, and caused her instant death. Peter insisted this was completely an unfortunate accident. However, he feared that having a woman die in his submarine would make him suspected of being a murderer. For this reason, in panic and fear, he made the decision to bury Kim at sea immediately. This meant the previous story about dropping Kim off on a safe island was completely a lie. But when someone had already lied like this, how could police trust any of his claims? To clarify the truth, police conducted a comprehensive search of Peter's research room and office. What they discovered on his personal computer left even experienced investigators shuddering. There were numerous videos called snuff films, extremely brutal and sick videos. It's hard to describe the horror of this content, but they contained actual footage of savage criminal acts like murder, torture, and rape. What was even more concerning was that most of the victims in these videos were women. All of these horrific materials were carefully stored on Madsen's computer. When faced with undeniable evidence, Peter Madsen tried to make a weak excuse. "Oh, I just downloaded those things from the internet." However, when police turned these videos over to technology experts for in-depth analysis, an even more frightening truth was revealed. The experts concluded that the women appearing in these videos had no intention of participating in filming for money or any commercial purpose. On the contrary, there was strong evidence suggesting these were real situations, actual crimes taking place. Even more horrifying was that some videos appeared not to be downloaded from the internet, but filmed directly. The painful question arose, what kind of person was Peter Madsen? This respected millionaire, really? When the investigation expanded, police's initial suspicions gradually turned to certainty. They contacted and interviewed Peter's former girlfriends to learn about his true character. What they revealed painted a picture of a man with terrifying, sick desires. The ex-girlfriends all confirmed that Peter had an unusual obsession with strangling during sexual relations. But what was even more bizarre and alarming was his other perverted habit. During sexual relations, Peter regularly played videos on screen, and those videos were precisely the brutal snuff films depicting scenes of women having their throats cut and dying painfully. This combination of sexual behavior and deadly violence was truly horrifying. The women who had been involved with Peter all admitted feeling extremely uncomfortable and uneasy about these strange behaviors. However, they had silently endured it for a simple but sad reason. Peter was known to be a person with unusual character, and more importantly, he was a successful, wealthy businessman. In society, publicly criticizing someone with such status wasn't easy at all. Therefore, they could only secretly think, maybe he just has some weird, perverted preferences, and try to overlook it to maintain the relationship. But perhaps it was precisely this wealth and power that had nurtured a dangerous psychology in Peter, that with his wealth and status, he could do whatever he wanted, including the most brutal acts, even murder. While the truth about Peter Madsen was gradually being revealed, the investigation had moved into its third day, August 13th. This was the day when the Nautilus submarine was finally successfully salvaged from the seabed to the surface. The investigation team didn't wait another second and immediately conducted a meticulous examination inside the submarine. The initial findings confirmed the worst fears. Traces of Kim's blood were found scattered throughout the submarine. However, an important detail was still missing. Police still hadn't found Kim's body. The presence of blood alone wasn't enough to definitively conclude whether this was an accident or murder, nor enough to prove whether Peter's testimony was true or false. But when the investigation team continued their more thorough examination, they discovered an extremely suspicious clue. Kim's underwear was found in the engine room. This was strange and inexplicable. If Kim had really died from being struck on the head by the hatch as Peter had testified, why would her underwear appear in the engine room? The events seemed inconsistent with each other, creating a picture full of contradictions and suspicion. Time passed in worry and unease until August 21st, exactly 11 days since Kim had stepped foot in the fateful submarine. A horrific discovery occurred. At the very beach where the Nautilus submarine had once been moored, a man cycling along the shore accidentally saw a strange object floating on the water's surface. When he approached to observe more closely, he was shocked to discover it was the upper torso of a woman, completely severed from the neck, arms, and legs. Police were immediately notified and proceeded to collect samples for DNA testing. The results confirmed the worst fear. This was indeed Kim Wall's body. The condition of this body part truly made even experienced forensic experts shudder. The cuts were very neat and precise, showing the perpetrator had used extremely sharp cutting tools. But what was even more frightening was that Kim's torso had 15 deep stab wounds scattered all over. However, through autopsy examination, experts determined that all these wounds were created after Kim had died. Why were there wounds after death? The answer from forensic analysis revealed a cruel purpose. These wounds were created to prevent the body from floating to the surface. When humans die, the decomposition process creates gas inside the body, causing the corpse to tend to float up. To prevent this, the perpetrator had deliberately created holes for the gas to escape. Not only that, but the body was also stuffed with heavy metal objects, another brutal method to ensure the body would sink to the ocean floor and never be found. But the cruelty didn't stop there. Upon closer examination, experts discovered evidence showing that Kim's genitals had been deliberately removed. This body part alone was enough to imagine what Kim had endured, horrific suffering not only before, but even after she had died. About a month and a half after the first discovery, on October 6th, another important clue appeared. This time, near the capital Copenhagen, a mysterious plastic bag had washed ashore. Could this be? Yes, the worst fear had become reality. Inside the bag were the remaining parts of Kim's body, including her head, arms, and legs. Along with these were the clothes and handbag she had brought on the fateful interview trip. This discovery completely shattered Peter Madsen's testimony. He had claimed that Kim died when the hatch fell and struck her head, causing a fatal injury. However, when forensic experts carefully examined Kim's head, they found no external wounds consistent with Peter's story. His testimony was completely untrue. Despite the mounting evidence, Peter Madsen remained stubborn in his denial. He continued to insist. "I only buried Kim at sea after the accident occurred. I never mutilated her body." At the same time, he also vehemently denied all accusations of sexual abuse. Peter even argued arrogantly, "I'm someone who has everything in this world. Why would I need to do such things?" How ironic that this very man who was proud of his wealth and success was obsessed with brutal snuff films. Perhaps in Peter's sick mind, the Nautilus submarine wasn't simply a technological invention. It was a perfect enclosed space, where no one could disturb, where the women he invited aboard would have no way to escape. This was the ideal location for the brutal crimes he had harbored in his sick mind. Looking back at the entire case, Kim was the fourth woman Peter Madsen had invited aboard his submarine. This meant that before this, he had sent similar invitations to 3 other women. Fortunately, all 3 had declined. Only Kim was the sole person to accept this fateful invitation. According to Kim's boyfriend, she had actually felt somewhat worried and uneasy about this sudden interview, especially having to board a private submarine. However, after months of persistently trying to contact Peter for an interview with no results, Kim feared that if she missed this opportunity, there might never be a second chance. Therefore, she decided to set aside her concerns and seize this rare professional opportunity. In her worst nightmares, Kim couldn't have imagined that this decision would lead her to such a tragic end. At this point, learning about Peter Madsen, the person behind the facade of a genius inventor, became extremely important. In Denmark, he was seen as a national hero, a symbol of creativity and success. Born in 1971, Peter had a childhood that couldn't be called normal. His mother, Inger, was more than 30 years younger than her husband. When she married Carl, she already had 3 children from a previous marriage. Peter was the child born after she remarried Carl. However, this father Carl had an extremely violent character. What was notable was that he showed clear discrimination. While he was relatively gentle with Peter, his biological child, he brutally beat the 3 stepchildren, Peter's older siblings, sometimes to the point of nearly threatening their lives. Finally, unable to endure any longer, Mother Inger decided to leave home with all 4 children, including Peter. However, the harsh reality of life quickly became apparent. Having a single mother struggle to support 4 children was extremely difficult and beyond her capabilities. Economic and mental pressure grew heavier, and finally, when Peter turned 6, she was forced to let the boy return to live with his violent father. After returning to Carl, Peter's life seemed to become more peaceful. From a young age, Peter showed extraordinary intelligence and intense passion for science. As a teenager, he even worked with his chemistry teacher to build small model rockets, showing clear potential as a future scientist. Peter didn't disappoint expectations from his natural talents. As an adult, he achieved brilliant success in developing breakthrough submarine projects, as mentioned, becoming a genius inventor recognized worldwide. Not only stopping at fame, these achievements also brought him enormous wealth. In the eyes of the public and media, Peter Madsen was the embodiment of intelligence, creativity, and unlimited passion. His success story, from an ordinary engineer rising to become a millionaire, had become a source of inspiration and ideal role model for countless young generations. He was regularly invited to speak at important events and became one of the most influential figures in Danish society. No one could have suspected that behind that perfect exterior lay such frightening darkness. Perhaps if not for Kim's tragedy, the world would never have known that Peter Madsen, the heroic symbol of the Danish nation, was actually someone obsessed with watching brutal snuff films and very likely had directly participated in producing them. This terrifying truth might have remained forever hidden behind the perfect mask of a genius. Peter Madsen's downfall occurred as rapidly as a sand castle swept away by waves. In January 2018, he was officially charged with 3 serious crimes: murder, desecration of a corpse, and sexual abuse. Proving the final charge encountered considerable difficulty because Kim's body had been so severely mutilated that forensic evidence regarding whether or not sexual assault occurred became unclear. However, the deliberate removal of the victim's genitals became undeniable evidence for the sexual abuse charge. But Peter Madsen once again staged a theatrical deception. In March 2018, at trial, he completely changed his testimony again. This time he claimed Kim had died from sudden CO poisoning. According to this new version, when the incident occurred, he was on the submarine's deck while Kim was inside. The submarine was then partially surfaced, and due to a technical malfunction, the interior space became a vacuum, causing Kim to die from inhaling toxic gas. Although not deeply knowledgeable about submarine operating mechanisms, what was notable was that Peter this time admitted part of the truth about mutilating the body. But these excuses sounded so bizarre and illogical as to be unbelievable. According to Peter, initially he intended to bury Kim's body properly, but when attempting to do so, he discovered her body was heavier than he thought. Moving the body out of the submarine alone became extremely difficult and impossible. Therefore, according to him, there was no choice but to cut the body into pieces for easier transport and disposal. What about stuffing heavy metal materials into the body? Peter offered an even more absurd explanation. He said this was a special funeral for the deceased. These excuses were truly unconvincing. Recognizing the unusual nature of the case, the court required Peter Madsen to undergo a comprehensive psychiatric examination. The results were completely unsurprising. He was clearly not psychologically normal. As expected, Peter's capacity for empathy and feeling remorse was significantly lower than normal people. However, what was notable was that his intelligence remained at a very high level. Based on these analyses, experts concluded Peter Madsen was a psychopath with high intelligence, combined with extremely severe narcissistic tendencies. Despite changing his testimony multiple times, Peter still firmly denied any sexual abuse. But right at this crucial moment, prosecutors revealed undeniable evidence: Kim's torn stockings and underwear. These pieces of evidence told the whole story about what had happened in the fateful submarine. Even more frightening, the investigation had discovered evidence showing Peter had planned to kill before inviting Kim aboard. He had prepared rope, knives, and many other tools, all of which could be used to commit crimes. This proved this wasn't a sudden accident, but a meticulously planned murder. Faced with the irrefutable evidence presented by prosecutors, Peter's situation became completely disadvantageous. Finally, the court issued a stern verdict, standing on the side of justice. Peter Madsen was officially convicted of deliberately luring Kim Wall onto the submarine with malicious intent, then binding, torturing, and brutally murdering her, before dismembering the body to destroy evidence. In April 2018, a life sentence was pronounced for this criminal. Although Peter appealed claiming wrongful conviction, all efforts were futile. The final sentence remained unchanged. However, the story of Peter Madsen didn't end there. About 2.5 years after being imprisoned, in October 2020, the name Peter Madsen once again appeared on newspaper front pages with shocking news. He had executed a daring prison escape. Fortunately, only a short time after escaping, he was captured by security forces in a nearby residential area. But his escape method also demonstrated his cunning and danger. Using his high intelligence, Peter had manufactured a fake bomb, completely without real destructive power, right in his prison cell. He used this fake weapon to threaten guards, turning them into hostages and successfully escaping from prison. The ironic and frightening thing was that Peter's genius reputation had become an advantage for him. When someone who had once been capable of building submarines declared, "I have a bomb," the guards completely believed it and fell into the trap. Even when police caught him in the residential area, they still worried this was a real bomb and had to mobilize an entire bomb disposal team to the scene. This was truly a dark comedy that no one could laugh at. The consequence of this escape was that Peter was sentenced to an additional 21 months in prison. However, with him already sentenced to life imprisonment, this additional sentence had virtually no practical meaning. Only if after several decades Peter applied for amnesty, these additional months might affect the review process. After Kim Wall passed away in tragedy, her family and dear friends established the Kim Memorial Fund, a fundraising foundation named after her, operating with a meaningful mission, annually selecting and providing financial support to young female journalists who share Kim's same spirit of courage and passionate dedication to journalism. This is not only a way for Kim to continue living through the stories of young colleagues, but also motivation for the new generation of journalists to continue the path she had worked hard to build. Kim's family hopes their daughter will not only be remembered simply as a victim of brutal crime, but first and foremost, Kim should be honored as a talented and passionate journalist, someone who dedicated herself completely to her noble profession until the final moments of her life. This is the most beautiful way to commemorate Kim Wall, and that concludes today's case. Thank you for following along and see you in future videos.